Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and its Ukrainian proxy forces. We're also covering other events, other conflicts around the world as they need covering. Now, I want to touch on a different subject very briefly before we kind of go into what is happening on the ground, on the battlefield in the borderlands or the Ukraine. Now, what I'm about to talk about could be tied into what is happening to other geopolitical events, such as the Ukrainian war. Now, hypothetically speaking, if there was, let's say, the risk or the possibility that, let's say, a 10 kiloton nuclear device had been smuggled into the United States. Specifically, let's hypothetically say that a nuclear weapon may have been smuggled into the New York City area. What would happen? Would the government announce that there was a threat of a low-yield nuclear device present in New York City or the surrounding areas? If there was a reasonably good chance that a nuclear device had been smuggled into the United States, specifically the New York area, again, let's say a 10 kiloton device, would the government, the federal government, announce this? If there was a 60% chance, meaning it is more likely that a device was smuggled into the United States than unlikely, what would happen? Would the government announce this? Well, what would happen if the government announced that it believed there was at least a 60% chance that a low-yield 10 kiloton nuclear device, and again, when you say nuclear device, normally the uninformed urbanite is going to immediately believe that a large city killer has been smuggled to within their vicinity. Now, obviously, a 10 kiloton nuclear device would do an immense amount of damage, especially depending on where it was detonated. But what would happen? Well, there would be an evacuation. In all probability, not a government-sponsored evacuation. People would flee. People would flee and maybe not return. There would be chaos. There would be chaos economically. It could very well have a major impact on the U.S. economy in a way that we have never seen before. What else would the government do? Well, they would immediately be utilizing both on-the-ground intelligence and they would also be using remote systems that can detect nuclear weapons. Those systems would most likely be deployed by the use of drones. Now, why would this happen? Why would an external nation state or non government actor smuggle a 10 kiloton nuclear device inside the United States with the intent on detonating it. Well, look what's happening around the world. The world right now, in 2024 going into 2025, is most likely more dangerous than at any time period in recorded history. You as an uninformed urbanite are not being informed this, though. You're not being taught this. Incredibly dangerous time period right now. And unfortunately, the United States, over the past 30 years, has accelerated its what I would call enemy-making process. The United States is making more enemies than it is making friends. And compounding that, I would say it is making mortal enemies. Mortal enemies. When you engage either in open hostilities or proxy hostilities against another group of people, and that group of people, whether it's a government or non-government entity, suffer loss, meaning family, loved ones, those that they respect, that are friends with. When they die, that has a cost. It has a ramification. It's a basic human emotion. Vengeance. Vengeance is real. With what is happening right now in the Ukraine. With the amount of people that are being killed. In a war that many believe, again, this is one side's perception, believes that the United States started or had a hand in starting and continuing. There was a very high-ranking Russian general who was in charge of their nuclear, biological, and chemical weapons side of its military. He was killed in Moscow. The Ukrainians have taken responsibility for this. And there's going to be a response from Russia, undoubtedly. The Middle East. Middle East is on fire. And again, you have to go back to the invasion of Iraq. You have to look at the concerted effort to topple Bashar Assad. Syria was not a threat to the United States. At no point. The ophthalmologist from London was not seeking to lay siege to El Paso, Texas, via Mexico. That was not on Bashar Assad's plate. And yet, look at where we're at now. And the war that then took place over the last 13 years inside of Syria, again, many pointing to the United States as a reason it occurred. Hundreds of thousands of people dead. A great cost. And there's going to be a cost, an additional cost. There's going to be ramification for what happened. Again, the inherent desire of a baseline human emotion seeking vengeance. Could be a 6-year-old boy, a 7-year-old boy who watched his entire family killed. Uncles, aunts, mother, father. Now fast forward 13 years, 10 years into the future, 15 years into the future. What is that 6-year-old boy's motive going to be in life? What do you think he is going to do? What is his goal going to be in the future? Especially if he's in a system that also indoctrinates him to despise the United States. Well, you have a mortal enemy. And unfortunately, tens of thousands of those have been created and are being created in perpetuity. So again, we're watching what has happened or is happening in regards to the drone activity in New Jersey, New York, on the northeastern coast of the United States. What's happening? Well, I can assure you, we're not going to know the whole story. The government is not going to come out and say, hey, we believe that there is a possibility that a nuclear weapon has been smuggled into a major U.S. city. Unless they were very certain that there was about to be a detonation, then maybe. But you wouldn't really hear about it. They're not going to announce that there is an elevated risk of a nuclear attack in a certain U.S. city. Just not going to happen. We're just going to have to wait and see. Now, at the same time, back to the Ukraine. Again, incredibly dangerous conflict. Incredibly dangerous. The U.S. is poking and prodding the Russians that have a great nuclear capability. And as I've talked about before, we believe that Ukraine is the final line. And if you just look at a map, there is no further eastward expansion. The only other expansion would be if you were to see the breakup of certain parts of the Russian Federation. Now, I know at this point that would seem nonsensical. But the whole idea, as I've talked about in a previous video, the whole concept of NATO pushing in into expanding into the Baltic states or directly supporting the Ukraine in a war against Russia would have been nonsensical back in 1994. Go back and watch that piece of content with Henry Kissinger. Now, there has been renewed discussions that the Ukrainians could be preparing for some sort of offensive operation, specifically in the area near Kherson and possibly Zaporizhia. Now, is that in the process of taking place? Are the Ukrainians preparing for some sort of offensive operations against the Russians? Probably not. Probably not. The offensive operation that the Ukrainians attempted was the failed operation in Kursk. So the prospects of an additional offensive operation by the Ukrainians, we don't believe is going to occur. We don't think the Ukrainians have that capability at the moment. The ongoing offensive in Donbass. Again, let's back this up again and look at what has happened over the course of the last few days. And then specifically, we're looking at the Kurkova pocket, and we will fast forward. In the south, southwest, Novosilka. Same, envelopment operations. Now, again, as this war continues, what happens in the future? Have we entered a state where the relationship between the United States and the Russian Federation can never be repaired? Now, if you're sitting here in the United States and that question is posed, you would probably say, you would probably be of the thought process that that relationship could be repaired. But I would beg to differ. And again, we're looking at casualties. We're looking at loss. We're looking at the cost on the battlefield in terms of human life over the last 3 years. And most Russians see this cost as being exasperated by the United States. Meaning that the conflict, the war, would not have been as long. It would not have been anywhere near as costly unless the United States had directly intervened along with other Western European powers. So again, if you're a high-ranking Russian official or a mid-level Russian officer who happens to have a son or a brother or a cousin or a family member having served and possibly killed or wounded in this battle, it is going to have a lasting impact on those Russians. It is going to have a lasting impact on Russian society. And I fear that both the West and the United States is making an enemy, or has made an enemy, that will never go away. The U.S. really has to look at the process of how it is making enemies and what that cost is going to be in the future. You cannot do this in perpetuity. Eventually, there's going to be a response. And what is that response? Does it involve a weapon of mass destruction detonating in a U.S. city? A nuclear weapon taking down Manhattan and Wall Street well, you can just imagine what would happen. And it would probably be the end of the United States as we know it. It would change. It would fundamentally change and would look nothing like it looks now. As always, thanks for joining us. More to come very soon. Have a good day.